Hello, people of world history. Welcome to Mr. Owen's online lectures. Let's get cracking. Go to Schoology, grab the guided notes, and get ready to take some notes on my lecture. I'm going to do this one quick. I've provided you guys with some words to define and some cool videos to watch. So this test this week should be pretty easy. We're going to start the Cold War causes and alliances. What's going to happen is World War II is going to end. The Allies will win. That includes Great Britain, the United States, Canada, and Russia. And right away, the United States and the other allies are going to disagree with the USSR or the Soviet Union on how to deal with the people that lost, how to deal with Germany, how to deal with Japan. Russia wants to punish Germany and Japan, and the United States sees this again as a repeat of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. They don't want to do that, and they really want to bring capitalism and democracy to these countries, and Russia or the Soviet Union is like, absolutely not. We want to do communism. So right away, they're going to butt heads over government. The United States is democratic with a capitalist government, and Russia or the Soviet Union is going to be Marxist or communist. And this is going to really fuel this kind of initial disagreement, which is going to turn into the Cold War. The Cold War is going to go from 1945 to either 1990 or 1991, depends on if you consider the fall of the Berlin Wall or the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, but it's going to last a really long time. So 1945 to about 1990, and it's going to be a competition with the United States and Russia over really everything, but especially influencing other countries of whether or not to become democratic or communist. It's called a Cold War and not a hot war because the United States and Russia never actually fight each other directly. That's why it's a Cold War. They're going to fight a lot of what's called proxy wars, and that's where two groups use other groups to fight each other indirectly. And we're going to go over a ton of examples in the next few weeks of proxy wars, but some examples that you may be familiar with would be the Vietnam War, where the United States tries to help South Vietnam stay democratic, while North Vietnam, who is given supplies by the Soviets, fights back and tries to make the country communist. Eventually they would win, and Vietnam would become a communist country. So Russia never actually fights in that war, but they supply the North Vietnamese. Same thing happens in the Korean War, where Russia will help fund the North Vietnamese. The United States and other allies will try to help South Korea, and today North Korea and South Korea are still split in two. So those are examples of proxy wars where two groups use other groups to fight indirectly. But that's why it's a Cold War. The United States and Russia never actually fight directly on the battlefield. And in order to bolster their numbers and feel more protected, the United States is going to form a group called NATO, which is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And that's going to include the United States, Canada, and 10 other capitalistic European countries like Great Britain, like France, people like that. And that's going to be their protection. And they agree that if Russia ever, or the Soviet Union ever attacks one of them, all of them will get involved. And NATO still exists to this day. In response to this, the Soviets are going to form a thing called the Warsaw Pact. And the Warsaw Pact is going to be a group of Eastern European countries called the Eastern Bloc or the Iron Curtain. And this is going to be the Soviets' buffer between these Western capitalist European societies. And it's going to help balance the influence of the Western Europeans. It's going to protect the Soviets' borders. And it's a great opportunity for the Soviets because we've talked about in the past, a great way to rebuild an economy is to invade other countries and just steal all their stuff. And so the Soviets are going to take over places like Ukraine, Czechoslovakia, and they're going to use their materials and their crops and their fields to help bolster their economy and protect themselves from Western Europe. So right away, there's just this huge difference in the way they want to run countries. And right after World War II, they decide to split Germany in two. There'll be an Allied side with the United States, Great Britain, and France, and then there'll be the Soviet side. And Berlin is the capital of Germany. And if you were to look on a map, Berlin is actually in the eastern part of Germany. eastern part becomes Soviet, and the western part becomes British, American, and French. But Berlin itself is in the eastern Soviet part, so they actually decide to split Berlin in two. And so Berlin is going to become, on the west, will become the United States, Great Britain, and France, and the east will be Soviet. So if you can think of like a city just all of a sudden getting split in two, that's exactly what happens. And the United States and Russia are going to disagree right away over how to operate in Germany. The Soviets are going to close the doors and won't let anything into West Berlin as a response of issues over money and the US dollar versus the ruble. And the United States is going to respond by doing what's called the Berlin Airlift. And they're going to say, forget you, Soviets, we're going to drop food and supplies to the Germans anyway. And this just creates the whole thing. And from there, it just dominoes. And the Soviets and the United States start to compete at everything. Not just other countries, not just trying to influence other countries on whether to be democratic or communist. They start racing to see who can get to space first. And the Russians launch Sputnik, and they get the first satellite into orbit. And the United States is determined to be the first to the moon, which they do. And the United States is launching monkeys into space. Russia's launching dogs. Yes, they launched a dog. Yes, we launched monkeys. It's awful. Rest in peace, monkeys and dogs. Then we start competing over nuclear weapons. The Russians had stolen the secrets to the United States nuclear weapon, and in 1949, World War II ends in 1945. 1949, the Soviets are already going to have a nuclear weapon, which freaks the world out. And then an arms race starts, and it's who can have the most weapons. And the United States keeps adding weapons. Russia adds weapons. The United States invents the hydrogen bomb, which is an even bigger atomic bomb. They compete in the Olympics. They compete in any way they can find a way to compete. They compete. And it's this tense thing that goes on forever and ever, and it's super costly. They basically keep trying to outspend the other one on military. And over the course of this whole thing, capitalism just does better for an economy than communism. And having a free market society, just people tend to just do better. And so as a result, over time, the Soviet Union is just going to not be able to keep up with the spending in the United States. And in 1991, it turned out they were completely broke, and our economy will completely collapse. But this is a long period of a time that was referred to as the Cold War, and it was a thing called mutually assured destruction. It basically meant that if the United States ever dropped a nuclear weapon or attacked the Soviets, they would drop a nuclear weapon on the United States. And we basically were going to wipe each other off the planet. So if you attack me, I'm going to blow you off the planet. And if you attack me, I'm going to blow you off the planet. So that's really why the Cold War never turns into a hot war, is because of the fear of complete annihilation of the planet. And it's a scary thing. So I'll be posting some videos and some things like that coming up. To show you kind of like what they were teaching in schools, and they were doing like drop and cover drills for nuclear weapons, and it gets pretty crazy. So check out the videos. I've got a bunch of videos for you to check out. Take some notes on those. You can use Summit if you want for some resources, or just Google some of the terms I've put in there for you. But once you have all that guided notes and some notes from my lecture, you should be able to pass this test no problem. Leave me a comment, leave me a like, let me know you're watching and listening. It helps me, encourages me. I hope you guys will have a wonderful day and are doing all right. Take care of yourselves and stay safe.